EastEnders Phil Mitchell has been left devastated by two characters leaving Walford in today's emotional double bill. With Phil determined to care for Nigel alone, Jay took matters into his own hands and called Nigel's wife Julie, after discovering that she was searching for her missing husband. Julie arrived on the square in today's first episode, with Jay having told her about Nigel's dementia. She spotted Nigel and Phil outside and approached them, but heartbreakingly he didn't recognize his wife. Back at the house, Julie desperately tried to jog his memory, then clashed with Phil, raging at him for not calling her and taking away her time with Nigel. Phil later made amends and showed Julie a video that Nigel had filmed for her months previously. She broke down in tears as past Nigel said that he wanted her to have a happy life and not to be burdened by his condition. Julie vowed to support Nigel unconditionally, but later told Phil that she would be taking him home to Scotland tomorrow. The next day, in the second episode, Phil attempted to halt Julie's plans, aware that Nigel had previously expressed a desire to stay with him permanently. Phil and Julie each tried to convince Nigel that he would be better off with them. Julie spoke to Jay, wondering whether Nigel was better off with Phil, and Jay told her about Phil's recent mental health crisis. When Phil and Julie argued over the situation once again, distressed Nigel ran off but forgot where he was. Julie calmed him down, which led Nigel to decide that he would go to Scotland after all. Phil conceded defeat, and Julie thanked him for being such a good friend to Nigel. As the pair prepared to leave, Linda checked on Phil, who was devastated about breaking his promise to Nigel and frightened of being left alone in the house. Linda urged Phil to say goodbye to Nigel, but her advice didn't work, as he refused to see his friend before he and Julie left Walford. Will Phil regret not getting closure? Phil Mitchell left crushed as Nigel leaves Walford with Julie in emotional double exit. In a powerful and deeply emotional double bill of EastEnders, Walford was rocked by a heart-wrenching goodbye that left Phil Mitchell devastated, questioning his choices, and forced to confront a loneliness he hadn't prepared for. The episodes, which aired back-to-back, delivered high drama, raw emotion, and a bittersweet farewell as two beloved characters, Nigel Bates and Julie Henthorne, exited the square, leaving behind broken promises, unresolved tension, and a grief-stricken Phil. As Phil's world shifts yet again, this unexpected departure storyline has proven to be one of the most quietly devastating arcs for the usually stoic Mitchell patriarch, showing a rare vulnerability and sense of helplessness that fans haven't seen in years. The beginning of the end, Julie's return to Walford. The emotional turmoil began in the first of two episodes, when Julie, Nigel's estranged wife, made her sudden return to Walford. Her presence was the result of Jay Brown's intervention. Having witnessed Phil struggle to care for Nigel alone, especially as the latter's dementia worsened, Jay decided that it was time to reach out to the one person who might be able to offer clarity, stability, and support, Julie. Jay's decision was a difficult one. He knew how much Phil valued the trust Nigel had placed in him, and how determined Phil was to fulfill his promise to care for Nigel in his final years. But with Phil drowning under the emotional and practical demands of the situation, Jay took action, calling Julie after discovering that she had been looking for her missing husband for some time. Julie's arrival was immediate and emotional. As she stepped onto the square and caught sight of Nigel with Phil, she approached tentatively, her heart clearly in her throat. The reunion, however, was far from the joyful moment she had hoped for. Tragically, Nigel didn't recognize her. The heartbreak on Julie's face was unmistakable, and gut-wrenching to watch. Anger, blame, and a hidden message. Back at the Mitchell household, tensions erupted between Julie and Phil. Julie, overwhelmed with emotion, accused Phil of robbing her of precious time with her husband. Her voice broke with fury and regret as she berated Phil for not contacting her sooner, for taking away moments that could never be regained. Phil, caught between guilt and defensiveness, struggled to explain his reasoning. He believed he was honoring Nigel's wishes, that Nigel had chosen to stay in Walford, to live out his remaining days among friends, not as a burden to his wife. But Julie wasn't ready to accept that rationale, not when she'd spent months searching and suffering in silence. Their clash was intense, personal, and painful, a culmination of months of buried frustration and conflicting emotions. In a poignant moment of attempted reconciliation, Phil later showed Julie a video message that Nigel had recorded months earlier, a message Phil had held onto as a reminder of his friend's wishes. On the screen, a lucid Nigel spoke with heartfelt honesty. He thanked Julie for their life together, and with gentle finality, asked her not to burden herself with his illness. He wanted her to live, to be happy, to remember him with love, but not duty. The emotional weight of the video shattered Julie's anger. As she watched the man she loved say goodbye to her in his own words, she broke down. It was a moment of devastating clarity, and it changed everything. A difficult decision. Julie plans to take Nigel home. Despite Nigel's initial confusion, Julie made a bold and final decision. She would be taking him home to Scotland. It was a choice she made not out of pity, but out of love, a promise to honor the man she married, even if he no longer fully remembered her. When Julie informed Phil of her plan, he was visibly shaken. He had promised Nigel that he would take care of him, that he wouldn't let him be pushed into unfamiliar hands. And now, that promise was being broken, and not by Nigel, but by forces beyond anyone's control. Phil's face said it all. Behind his gruff exterior, he was breaking. A fight for Nigel's future. In the second half of the double bill, Phil made a final attempt to stop the inevitable. Desperate to hold on to the man he'd come to see as family, he pleaded with Julie to reconsider. Julie, however, wasn't deaf to his pain. She too had doubts. She reached out to Jay for insight, questioning whether Nigel might actually be better off staying with Phil. She had seen the bond between the two men and recognized Phil's sincerity. But Jay, hesitant yet honest, told her the truth. Phil had recently suffered a serious mental health breakdown. He was barely coping, and the pressure of being Nigel's sole carer was taking its toll. Julie was left conflicted. Her instincts told her to bring Nigel home, but she also saw that love came in many forms, and Phil's commitment to Nigel was as real as her own. Later that day, another clash between Phil and Julie boiled over, and in the chaos, Nigel wandered off. The square was thrown into a panic as Phil and Julie searched for him. Nigel, lost and confused, couldn't remember where he was. Eventually, Julie found him, calmed him, and gently brought him back to safety. In that moment, it became clear to Nigel where he belonged, and who he trusted. "I want to go home," he said simply, quietly. With Julie, Phil's heartbreak. "I've let him down." As Nigel and Julie prepared to leave Walford, Phil stood in silent devastation. Linda Carter checked in on him, worried about the toll it was taking. She tried to encourage Phil to say goodbye, to get closure, to honor the relationship that had meant so much. But Phil couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he sat in silence, filled with shame and sorrow. "I made him a promise," he confessed to Linda. "And I broke it. I've let him down." Linda, ever the empath, tried to help Phil see the truth. That he hadn't failed Nigel, but had given him love, care, and dignity when he needed it most. Still, Phil remained unconvinced, overwhelmed by guilt and loss. As the car pulled away with Julie and Nigel inside, Phil watched from behind the curtains, unable to face the moment directly. The Mitchell household, once so full of noise, now echoed with silence. What this means for Phil Mitchell. This double departure isn't just a temporary loss for Phil, it's the unraveling of a promise, a bond, and a rare glimpse into the emotional world of one of EastEnders' most guarded characters. Phil has always been the rock, the man others rely on. But his relationship with Nigel softened him. It made him reflect on his past, his regrets, and his capacity to care. Now, with Nigel gone, Phil is left wondering what his purpose is, and whether he's destined to spend the rest of his life alone. This storyline marks a significant shift for Phil Mitchell. It reminds fans that even the toughest characters aren't immune to heartbreak, and that in the quiet moments, the pain hits hardest. Insiders say that Phil's emotional isolation will continue to unfold in upcoming episodes, and that his current state of mind may have far-reaching consequences. Julie and Nigel. A new chapter in Scotland. As for Julie and Nigel, their future in Scotland is uncertain but hopeful. Julie has recommitted herself to caring for Nigel, not out of obligation but out of enduring love. Whether Nigel's memory returns, even briefly, or continues to fade, Julie has vowed to be by his side. Their departure scene was understated but powerful, a silent drive into the unknown, with the past behind them and a new challenge ahead. Fan reactions, tears and praise. Fans of EastEnders took to social media in droves to express their emotions following the double episode. Absolutely broken by Phil and Nigel's goodbye. The video scene with Julie had me bawling loudly crying #EastEnders. This is the most vulnerable we've seen Phil Mitchell in years. And Steve McFadden deserves an award for this performance. I loved Nigel back in the day, and seeing him return like this was so heartbreaking but beautifully done. Please bring them back someday. What's next on EastEnders? As EastEnders moves forward, this storyline is likely to spark new emotional arcs, particularly for Phil. With his mental health fragile, and his support system growing thinner by the day, will he finally open up and get help? Or will this new wave of loneliness push him further into darkness? With Linda watching over him and Jay still in his corner, there may yet be hope. But fans should brace themselves for more emotional fallout as the weight of recent events catches up with Phil.